Welcome to Holistic Wisdom Live. My name is Elena Bensonoff, and today I have an honor of having such a special guest. His name is Stewart Pearce, and the title of today's episode is The Resonance of Your Authentic Voice. Let me give you a brief bio into Stewart, and we'll begin with this magical conversation today. So Stewart Pearce is a legendary master of voice and presence coach who has worked with actors, royalty, CEOs, change makers, and celebrities for over 40 years. Stewart was the head of the voice at the Webber Douglas Academy, London from 1980 to 1997, helped pioneer Shakespeare's Globe Theatre as master of voice between 1997 and 2010 with Mark Rylance, and has coached luminaries such as Eddie Redmayne, Matthew Good, Sebastian Stan, Hugh Bonneville, Emilia Clarke, Margaret Thatcher, Mo Mowlam, Anita Roderick, and Diana, Princess of Wales, just to name a few. Stewart has published The Alchemy of Voice, The Heart's Note, The Angels of Atlantis, and Diana, the Voice of Change, which expresses entirely new revelations about Diana's life principles concerning how she healed bulimia, empowered her empathic nature, ignited personal radiance, and became a global icon. Stewart, thank you so much for being here for such a really beautiful conversation. And I have to share with my audience first that I did order your book, Diana, the Voice of Change. As soon as I touched the book and I started reading it, I had tears coming down from my eyes. It is just such a soulful read. And you did say you didn't write it, it just came through you, and I believe it. And I also think that you're such a beautiful vehicle for the divine, especially the divine feminine, to be expressed through. And we need this kind of voice to help guide humanity, especially at this time with so much media and people putting their voices out there to help recognize what it is. What does it mean to connect to your authenticity? What does it mean to be in resonance with who you are? And I wanted to read an excerpt from your book. There's so many. Actually, the way I read books is I underline, I highlight, but I'd love to read a couple of excerpts first before we start. So the Voice of Change holds sparkling authenticity in the waves of its resonance. The Voice of Change speaks with passionate truth, as it is one of the most powerful tools we humans possess. The Voice of Change sounds our world into existence. The Voice of Change has only one clear quest: to follow the path of destiny, and that it be laid with silver and gold, leading the individual to an open heart and a creative excellence that is full of the loving force of the universe. There's so much beauty in here. So thank you, Stewart, first of all, for coming into my field of perception, so I get to know you better. And thank you for your writings. Thank you for your work.
It was destined. It was destined. And, firstly, thank you. Thank you for inviting me on. And I can see exactly why we were supposed to meet, and for the beautiful honor that you've given me by opening up this conversation, and also by bringing in the whole substance of Diana, and of course the Voice of Change, which was something that she was, as we know. But at the same time, suddenly after her death 25 years ago, she slept for a while and now is really coming back, which was sort of precipitated, I guess, in 2015 and 2016 by #MeToo, which was when so many of my Hollywood actresses said to me, you worked with Diana. Can you help us? Can you, because we need to step forth. And many of them have been maltreated or oppressed. And so that's really where the Voice of Change was given its full sail, so to speak.
And I love that your focus in this book and also in the work that you do is not about focusing on the negativity or the shadows, but it's really about connecting to the authentic resonance that exists, what I would call the divine spark that exists within each individual soul, whether it's male or female, because we all carry this creative essence, which is the divine feminine within us. And it's the principle of connecting to who we are. And I'd like to start first with your journey, because most people who are our followers perhaps not aware about your journey. And how is it that you came to have such a powerful mission, and also the recognition of what it means to embody your own authentic voice?
Wow, it's quite a journey, because my life is 70 years, so it's quite a journey. I suppose, to go to the synthesis, the real center of how I've created all of this work is really in service to the wonderful people who come to me. And of course, then in service to the principles of the divine: love, grace, peace, understanding, empathy, compassion. Life was not easy as a child, because although from a material point of view, there was a certain ease and grace about it because of the way that I was brought up by parents who were royal servants. So we were sort of steeped in all of that stuff, that goes with royalty. My father worked for the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh. And at the same time, I was a being that saw the multidimensional universe. So I spoke about what I saw in my innocence, thinking that they all saw what I was seeing, and then discovered horrified faces. And my father was a war hero and very militaristic and very male, hyper testosteronized, and he thought that this fey child, this sensitive, very feminine child, was a major challenge for him. What precipitated was the fact that I found it very difficult to learn. I found it very difficult to be at school, as many as we empaths have, or star seeds have discovered. And this meant that I couldn't read, and this meant that I couldn't really compute basic math. The reading aspect was more to do with the fact that I was seeing sound, that I was synesthetic. I didn't know how to describe this, of course, as a small child, because I thought everybody could see what I was seeing, and then discovered through the disapprobation, through the pain of extraordinary disciplines that were very brutal, they hit you then to make you more intelligent, that I decided that I should switch off. So I self-muted for 2 years. And that was the greatest thing that I could do, because it made me still, and I observed. And what I saw was the way that pure light form, the igniting pleasure of soul within an individual, brought forth extraordinary love and fun and play and gentleness and grace. And then those people who were stern in their disapprobation, who just wanted to discipline me the whole time, their auric field were always so dark. The difficulty was that when they got angry with me because of my synesthesia, their anger looked like broken glass coming towards me, because they were shattered in their field. And so I would do this. And of course, I was considered to be crazy. And unfortunately whisked off to what today we would call a psychiatric hospital, to be proclaimed mad, and I was going to be locked away. My mother was in pure defense of this, of course, of trying to allow people to understand that I was just an unusual child. Unfortunately, a guardian came in the form of a beautiful woman who was a pediatrician, who I remain in contact with all through her life and all through my life. She died 2 years ago. And she said, this child is merely hypersensitive. This child is seeing what we cannot see. There is nothing unusual about what this child is seeing, but it's going to be difficult for him within the context of the old paradigms of educational pursuit. My mother, as soon as I came out of 2 years of silence, I was humming. I had to make sounds. So I was humming and singing, just making up. And my mother kept saying, Stewart keeps singing. I think he should be in a church choir. Yes, that was a piece of brilliance, because The boys, the choristers, looked so extraordinary with those clothes, you know, with those white ruffs and the surplices, but also because I loved sound. I felt at one with sound. Sound to me were these extraordinary waves of energy that would also formulate in bubbles, which is when I really began to see angels as orbs of light. And so, although I couldn't read as I held the missal, you know, the prayer book or the music sheet, I just copied the other boys. And then suddenly the waves of energy of sound allowed the words and the duration of each note, which was also part of the wave, allowed the words to drop into the wave. So I began to read singing and then moved into reading speaking. And then, of course, I realized that the way that I was being taught was the cat sat on the mat. And there is nothing staccato about the whole of my being. It's all about waves of grace and of elegance and of ease. And so that's where it really all started. But of course, academia was difficult. And then somebody, as my voice broke, said, there's something about your voice. There's something about your voice. And I thought, well, they're telling me there's nothing about me, but they're saying there's something about my voice. I should pursue this. And somebody said to me, one of my teachers said to me, have you ever thought of being an actor? And I didn't really what that meant. I mean, I'd been to the theatre and TV was just sort of beginning at that time. However, there was a drama group in my high school. So I joined it and people said, hey, you're really good at this. Whereas everything else had been very poor before. I discovered a way of being able to allow the love of sound, the love of great words to pour through me as a vessel, as a transport vehicle for the inspiration of the divine. And that's how it all started. So I became an actor.
It's wonderful. And I think through acting, you learn to really connect to all of your senses and embody it even more. And that hypersensitivity served you really well because you became more and more in tune with yourself and then with the world around you.
Yes, and the key that we started with, which is the soul of authenticity, that, of course, is at the very core of the actor's work, because the core of great acting is a truth of feeling statement. And so when we think of authenticity, we move into, well, am I really being integrous? Am I really being truthful? Or am I just creating illusion? And of course, this is a time when we're seeing this great transformation that we're moving through, that we're recognizing that there's so much falsehood in our world that we're all yearning for greater truth. And so we're beginning to really establish, well, what is the truth that we want to live? And what is the hierarchy of values that we wish to either create or live by and therefore communicate in our communities, you know. And so I learned a lot about the transposition or the transformation of self from weakness into strength while I was acting. And then, of course, after 10 years of acting at the end of the 70s, the tragedy of my mother's death occurred, and that shifted the whole of my process. And the wheel of destiny turned, and out of nowhere, there was this extraordinary opportunity asked of me to become a voice coach. So I just went through this big door and was asked by a leading voice coach who was the voice director of the Royal Shakespeare Company. And in the next breath, she said, and there's this woman I want you to work with. I don't want to work with her. She's just taken over the Tory party. So in 1980, there I was walking into Downing Street and met Margaret Thatcher. And that's where it all began. And Margaret was charming and gracious and wonderful and very intelligent. And we got on like a house on fire. I mean, this was in the early time of her premiership. Of course, it wasn't towards the end of her premiership when her power became in a position of misuse or whatever we may refer to it. It was right at the very beginning when she needed to really find a much more authentic voice, her own voice, rather than this sort of upper middle class English sound that she put on purely as a result of that was the passepartout, you know, that was the passport to be successful at Oxford.
I love that you just actually showed what inauthentic voice sounds like, because it's unbelievable whether we are aware of it or not. You know, we with our phones or laptops, we turn on, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, you can immediately sense when somebody is aligned and they're in their authentic self or not. And it is that difference when people are speaking from their headspace. This is why I got so excited when I heard you talk about it, versus really being in their heart. And that is the difference of what makes someone authentic. Can you talk a little bit about the dissonance of having to put on shows? I call it shows now, right? Where people have this need to put out 60-second clips, 30-second clips, where there's absolute disconnect with what is integrous, authentic, truthful.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? This great race that we're all part of, unless we choose not to be. And I feel that the global pause that's arisen through COVID has given us an opportunity of stilling ourselves from the fixation that we have as a result of being educated, socialized, and conditioned into doing. And of course, the thing about doing, as we all know, is that most of the time we're not doing what we could be doing because they say so, whoever they may be, our critics, our teachers, our bosses, our fathers, our whatever, or the internal voices that keep us in the tyranny of oppression. And so we're going faster and faster and faster. And of course, we are being judged all the time. We are being quantified all the time on our intellectual prowess. Whereas actually, feeling is the language of the soul. And so we can use this as a compass, fine. But actually, the heart is the seat of the soul. And if in our voices, if we're really sitting in our hearts, we find our note, that we each have a signature note that is at the very core of our range. And if we're here, you know, and there we are, just simply moving really fast. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Oh my God, you know, that we're not in that space. And I feel that that's what the great transition is that we're moving through at this time. The difficulties you've said is that there's so much dissonance, and we're being asked constantly to feed the dissonance. And yet suddenly societal events take place that stop us. We begin to be who we truly are rather than what they wish us to be. Whether it be I am this person's son, or I am, you know, fulfilling this role, or I am in relationship to, really being means that we recognize that we're children of God. And as Tihar Adana said, you know, that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And so we come back to the quintessence of what it is to feel as empaths, and that empathic union with the divine is our superpower.
That's so beautiful. And I know in your book, you also share the steps of how you can find your authentic signature, because every soul is like a fingerprint. We all have a unique resonance. So you're guiding people in that book to connect to what that is.
Yeah, yeah. And it's a purely physical route to discover this. Do you see? Our voices are purely physical means that we use to communicate the way we think and the way we feel, the way we feel, the way we think, except that we're preoccupied with the Cartesian invention of I think, therefore I am. And really we need to reinvent this into I think and feel, therefore I am that I am.
Beautiful.
So it is purely physical. And, you know, it's because it's quite difficult writing a book about the physical nature of finding your voice. So I've tried to be, when I write, I try to write as though I'm speaking, because I'm a speaker, I'm not really a writer. I've started writing books at the beginning of this century, and because I was asked to. And when I think of the first book that I wrote, which was rather like a sort of high school essay, was I hadn't written professionally at all. You know, I'd been a speaker, I'd been part of oral culture and using other people's words, the words of great Shakespeare and the other poets. But, you know, as I began to write it, I began to formulate a really precise paradigm or gestalt about how people could feel that the mental body could be imprinted on their own physical, their own physiology, to be able to breathe and to feel where the resonances are. And then, of course, I've made lots of recordings where people can engage in sonic meditations, listening to my voice and repeating or resonating with me and finding how to open up the chakras through sound and how to find one's note to bring oneself into principal harmony.
It's really a holistic approach because it is through the physical means, which the physical vehicle that we're experiencing life through, connecting the mental aspect and then the soul integration as well. So yes.
Yes, and you know, this is what although I taught it intuitively in the early stages of my voice teaching career, you know, which is now 40 years ago, that when I was asked if I would be the master of voice at Shakespeare's Globe, just to give context, this was the reconstruction of the theatre that would have been on the same site virtually in 1597, where medievalism believed in the holistic nature of life. And so the sacred geometry of the building is enraptured by earth, water, air, and fire, that the building is built on 4 levels, and the audience sits on the 4 levels. So the audience is sitting in earth, sitting in water, part of the air, which is the only continuous circle actually in the circle of the globe, the divine feminine principle, and then the stage thrusts, the square stage thrusts into the circle of the feminine. The masculine comes into the feminine. Fascinating. And of
Yes.
course, this continuous ring of the third circle, the air, is where the minstrels gallery was. It's where the musicians were. So you see today when we go to the musical theatre or to the opera, the orchestra is locked in the pit. They're locked in the underworld. Whereas in the medieval period, you could see sound. And then, of course, there's fire, the pure element of spirit. Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heavens of invention. You know, it's all about inspiration. So that taught me a tremendous amount about our bodies, our pieces of architecture. And as another poet said, all architecture is frozen music. So if we can open up the architecture of our bodies, if we can feel our spine aligned, if we can feel the whole of our bodies weighted so that we can feel our own gravity, then automatically these great centers of earth, water, air, and fire begin to open within us. And then, of course, we can get really clever and start working with the chakras.
Mm. Beautiful. And now I'd like to talk to you about the divine feminine, which comes through so much in this book and in your body of work. And as you shared as a child, you were so deeply connected to this divine feminine energy of the principles your whole life. And this is really what it means to embody the compassion, the benevolence, the kindness, grace, and what Diana meant for so many people. She was called the Princess of the Hearts, right? And what does it really mean to you to connect to the divine feminine principles and where it's moving? Because as we're seeing with so much dissonance, as we just said with the voice, there is also the shadow aspects that are rising up, where women are craving for that connection, but somehow are going towards the shadow embodiment versus embodying the grace and the light of the divine feminine principles. Perhaps you can touch upon that and how Diana was able to heal so many aspects within herself through the work that both of you did for a couple of years in order for her to embody the beautiful essence that she has always been.
Which was, of course, very innate with Diana, that her blueprint, her crystalline sense of self was utterly beautiful, loving, joyous, playful, empathic, compassionate. And again, was not academically oriented, and so found schooling difficult. I'm reminded in this moment of that great quote from Carl Jung, who said something, I think I'm paraphrasing, I'm not saying it exactly, but being enlightened is not a question of imagining beings of light. It's a question of drawing the light into the darkness. The difficulty, of course, with the shadow complex is that our world has denied it for so many centuries, has locked it away. It was something that you could not express. It was evil or dark or inappropriate or socially unacceptable or whatever. And now we're beginning to realize, as we examine personal sovereignty, which is coming back to a balance between the male and the female, the thinking and the feeling, the doing and the being, the effort and the freeness, the dynamic and the still, that we're beginning to realize that our leaders have locked their shadows away. And here they may look very impressive on the world stage, but then we hear about what they're doing backstage, and that some of it is really ghastly. And so the shadow is out. The first thing we need to do is to not judge it, but to recognize that it is actually a misalignment of light. And that by not judging it, but by loving it unconditionally, we move into the power of grace through forgiveness. And therefore the pain of reaction is no longer within us. But that, of course, our bodies are very dense, as we know, and we hold on a cellular level all of these memories. So it takes time, and that's why we're given these long, long, long lives. It's not just because modern science has given us medical sustainability. It's to do with the fact that our souls are choosing, as these vessels of humanness on planet Earth, living in weight, space, and time, are giving us the opportunity to really identify where the shadow is, and then to transform alchemically the darkness into light. And that's exactly what Diana's life was, because we can see that her bulimia was self-sabotage. It was the only real thing that she had in her life. If she gave herself pain or ate a lot and then went into the bathroom and vomited, that at least she was feeling something about the expunging nature of her shadow. It's just that she didn't know how to corral or manage all of those energies until she met one or two really sensitive people in the medical world who said, "You will overcome this." And then she began to see ways of doing that. And the first thing was to say no. Not yes, 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 yes. Of course I will. Of course I will. And that's when the problems began between herself and the man whom she loved deeply, Prince Charles, and continued loving all the way through to the end of her life. It's just that he was unable at that time to be able to dance with her immense emotional honesty about her love and also about her darkness, because he had been forced to literally push his own shadow down or lock it away in a closet by the uncomfortability, by the cruelty that he had experienced. He's an immensely sensitive man, and one who would be very interested in this conversation, you know.
Fascinating. How long working with Diana did you begin to notice that that shift of integration was happening? Was she, like, she must have been extremely open, right? Because she's so sensitive.
Just amazing, amazing, amazing. From the moment I met her, it was just glorious, you know. These beautiful blue eyes that one felt oneself falling into, you know, diving into these pools of sensitivity. Well, I met her right after the BBC Panorama interview with Martin Bashir, where she felt vindicated in the sense that she'd come forth and spoken about some of the elements of oppression within the royal household, which was much more to do with not the Queen and the personalities involved. It was much more to do with the contingencies, the people who hold the royal households together, because each individual, each royal personage has their own household. So it's really the men in grey suits, as she called them. They all wear grey suits so they can neutralize themselves. And these people are very powerful because they hold the rules of protocol, and that there's a certain way to behave, and that's how one starts with the rules of protocol. What's interesting about the Queen's passing is that Prince Charles is now, of course, bringing in a revolution in relation to those protocols, and other members of the royal family are following suit. So Diana felt vindicated by this, but she watched herself on screen and realized that she wasn't appearing powerfully in the way that she felt the power inside. And it was largely to do with the fact that she was using this very light voice that was very submissive, like this. And so the first thing that I did was to get her back into her body, to get her breathing, so she could feel this wonderful, weighty, earthy resonance in her body. And Diana was immensely in tune with her body. I mean, she was so sensual and beautiful and aware and very sportive. You know, she was a water baby, so she swam every day. She would swim 40 lengths every day. And so she was very aware of the musculature and the nature of her body. And of course, it sought out healing, colonic irrigation, massage, acupuncture, you name it, in terms of healing the wounds that she had. And so it was very easy to just connect her with her body and therefore with her voice right at the center of her being. What was more difficult is how she was constantly being required to public speak. And of course, as we all know, that in public speaking, in formal speech, we feel that we need to do something completely different from how we are, that we need to put on something. And the whole point of being authentic is to recognize that the way that we are is absolutely sufficient, and that all we need to do is to be the wonder of who we are. And that's the magnetic voice that draws everybody in, as we see with our little ones, with our children. You know, we see them being amazingly brave and courageous when they step into formal speech, just by being who they are. And sometimes just by being still, they are magnetically beautiful in their power. So we worked on these elements of identifying very specifically where Diana felt herself to be holding herself back, so that she could actually feel, I am safe, I am secure, all is well, and I'm in absolute connection with my core vibration. And it's my core vibration that I'm going to allow the world to feel. And obviously this was endorsed by the world because everybody loved her.
And that's the question that I have, is what do you feel made her the icon that she is and has been?
Well, that's a really interesting question, and I can answer it on several levels. Diana evidently had a certain je ne sais quoi. There was a quality about her which was highly unique. So what was that quality? Well, I believe that she was an anointed one, that as a spiritual being, her destiny was to bring us to a point of reckoning about ourselves as we watched her life. And I feel that this was evinced in the way that we saw people respond to her when she was alive, but also the way that the world responded to her when she died. And so, you know, her passing was a very unusual social phenomenon, wasn't it? Because we saw this great wave of Shakti, the very essence, the very womb of the divine feminine opened and poured forth this release, this healing, this transformation, and the world wept.
You know, I was thinking at the moment back through our history, through our recorded history, were there women that touched so many on such a deep level with their kindness and compassion? And I would say Diana has been the one, because there's so many feminine leaders that have been praised, but she's yet the one that is known for her gentleness and kindness. And I think this is probably what made her so uniquely magical in a way that is also so needed at the moment, right?
Well, you see, I mean, Diana chose to not adhere to what so many women had had to adhere to before her, which was the only way that the intelligent woman could be successful in society was to adopt the roles that the men had given them. And what Diana decided to do was to change that she was not going to be her father's daughter alone, you know, because her father was a peer, one of the most noble lineages in the whole aspect of the aristocracy of the British people, much more elevated than the Saxe-Coburg household that today we call the Windsor family. Which, you know, which is quite a combination of inbreeding and so forth. However, that she chose to, just through her impetuosity and her desire to be free and to be explosive in the creative aspect of her love and her kindness, and is quoted to have said, it's eco-sustainable to hug people.
Mm.
And so forth and so forth. So her gentleness, her humility, her constant or ordinariness within her extraordinary role was something that we found delicious. And I feel at the time, you see, we were feeling the divine speaking through her. And there is something very metaphysically extraordinary about the way that she chose to die and where she chose to die, which I write about in the book. So I don't preoccupy the reader with, was she killed, or what, was it a ritual killing? I mean, it's obvious that something happened, but do we need to, we all know that, so why go there? What I found was much more interesting is where she chose to die. Because, for example, the space, the Pont de Almar, the Bridge of Souls, was originally in Roman times the Temple of Diana. That's where she died. And there's a long story which I try and make short within the book, but her family, the Spencer lineage, is part of the ancient Merovingian line, and the Merovingian nobles can be traced all the way back to Yeshua, all the way back to Mary Magdalene and Yeshua. And so Diana was always considered to be a deity of extraordinary power for women who wish to live in a life of free will, to explore what the feminine virtues are, and how, for example, Diana is overseen by the moon, is seen to be the goddess of the moon, and therefore the goddess of childbirth. And there couldn't be something more sacred than the nature of bringing a child forth into the world, and having Diana as a deity to, to live that through. The interesting about the lineage of the Spencers, as I was saying, connected with the Merovingians, is that the Merovingian peoples, they were warlords, tribal warlords, who lived in the area of what we call Paris, from around 350 AD to about 800 AD. And they were constantly in duels fighting, and all of their duels would be fought in the front of the Temple of Diana, because they reconstructed the temple from the Roman ruins. Diana was their principal deity. And they fought the duels there because they believed that there was a portal into heaven there. And this is really, anybody who was vanquished would pass through and become God's eyes on earth. And so where she chose to go was this portal. And that also, coming back to the question that you asked me about her essence, and I said, well, there was a certain je ne sais quoi. Her spirit and her destiny is interwoven into these very fine metaphysical features that are part of what it is to be a human being on this planet, and how our varying cultures gave us information about how we can actually open up portals. For example, the passing of Queen Elizabeth, which only happened 3 months ago. Isn't it interesting she chose to die in Scotland, where the mythical being that oversees, that overlights Scotland is the unicorn. So Elizabeth died in unicorn energy. And of course, the unicorn is always seen mythologically in association with the divine maiden, with the pure young woman who is the vessel between the worlds.
Interesting.
And
I didn't
then,
know unicorns were linked to Scotland.
yeah, if you go to Scotland, in all of the ancient architecture, well, in some of the older architecture, you'll see unicorns everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. And when you look into the coat of arms of the British royal family, there is the lion and there is the unicorn, the meeting of England and Scotland.
Fascinating.
So the resonances are very deep. And of course, I suppose we're moving into the field of the mystery of history. But this was just in allusion to your question about her essence. There was something very remarkable, which I explore in the book, that she was an anointed one. And so therefore, one of the things towards the end of the book that I explain is that when I said to Diana, well, what do you want to be? And she said, well, I don't really know. I'm no longer the people's princess. And I said, well, you're the queen of everybody's hearts. And she said, oh, can I use that? And I said, of course you can use it. It's yours. But if you are to be the queen of everybody's hearts, you're not going to be sitting in the consecration chair. meaning you're not going to be part of a coronation ceremony. But what we need to do is to ritualize the accession to your throne. And so I've written this into the book of what it is to be an anointed one. Because, for example, in the British coronation ceremony, there is this remarkable moment where oil from King Solomon's temple is placed on the hands, the breast, and the brow of the monarch. And in that moment, Queen Elizabeth in 1953, well, Princess Elizabeth, became a high priestess. And that's why she chose to always live that service and that duty as an upholder of the faith of the divine through all of her works, and that she would never have abdicated, which is why her death was so extraordinary in terms of the overall arcing principle of the arousal of the divine feminine. And there is more about her passing to come, which we haven't seen yet. I know we had 10 days of mourning. We certainly here we had 10 days of mourning. Some of the most extraordinary evocations in my life, because I was called back into the royal presence by it. And, went to the lying in state of her body. The unicorn energy came back into the lion of England, and there she was with her crown, her scepter, and her orb. And the lying in state, I've never seen so many angels in that hall, and the cosmic guardians were there. In fact, I was so overtaken that I thought I was going to faint, and then suddenly felt a hand on my back. And here was this policeman saying, "Are you okay, sir?" And I said, "Thank you so much." And he said, "Well, I saw you beginning to topple. It's really something, this energy, isn't it?" So even this wonderful ordinary policeman was feeling the
I saw there was an
intoxication.
image with two rainbows as well.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. So what is your hope with writing this book, Diana, The Voice of Change, for humanity, for the divine feminine? And yes, where do you offer programs, for example, online, where people can learn how to authentically connect to their voice?
Yes. Oh, yes, yes. And, we're now coming to the end of the period of COVID, the great global pause. And so having spent the last 2.5 years really promulgating all of the angelic sound healing work that I do, I'm now moving back into 2023, because we're recording this in December of 2022. I'm moving back into the facilitation of the magnetic voice. So it's quite extraordinary that I was invited by Gaia TV to do the interview. You saw the interview, and now here we are having an interview. So 2023, there will be a recreation of my website, which will be offering lots of courses to do with exactly this, finding one's voice. For me, the work is primarily about really assisting the women of the world, the women and the girls of the world, because to quote His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the next chapter of history will be written by the women and the girls. In other words, it's this rebalancing of the overarching male principle, this rebalancing with the females, so that there's this beautiful equity between both genders, and of all the extrapolations thereof that move into the gay community, into transsexualism, into diversity, and so forth and so forth. And so Diana, the Voice of Change, is really the beginning of a project which I want to call the Diana Heart Path, where we can come together in communion and experience what that communion is all about with constructive creative processes, bearing in mind that the male aspect of our being has taught us to compete. And now the feminine aspect of our being is coming in and saying, no, the beauty of the way that we can unite in the future is through pure co-creation and collaboration. It's not about competing with one another. So it's a question of healing the wound of competition and transforming into the sacred vessel of what it is to co-create and what it is to collaborate. So there can be constructive therapies for anybody who comes who is not achieving the optimized excellence that they want to achieve in their life. Because, the majority of people who come to me for soul reading say, I don't know what my purpose is, and I'm still carrying the wounds of the past. So we need to find ways of being able to heal these wounds so that we can move into the brilliance that, of course, we are destined to be as spiritual beings having a human experience.
That's so beautiful. Thank you so much for the work that you do, Stewart, and for all of the wisdom that just eloquently pours through what you say, your voice, your book, and everything else that you have to share. So thank you.
Bless you. I mean, I can't tell you, it's the most extraordinary joy. It really is. I am like a a little boy playing in sand. I am having the most amazing time because, as I said earlier, life hasn't always been as flowingly easy as it is now. Which doesn't mean to say that there aren't the challenges and the problems. They allow us to muscle up and to become stronger with our belief, faith, and trust in the divine, that the divine will always help us. So it's been a great joy speaking with you, and I want to thank you from the deeper part of me for this opportunity. And I know through your beauty and your grace that this information will just wave and flow through the world, awakening the hearts and minds of many people. So thank you.
Thank you, Stewart, so much.